we have some guests. When you get a chance, put a name tag on. Don't rush off now, but when you get a chance. Some of our graduates have met with various accidents along the way. Rohit will explain that in a moment. But I'd like to get started. So this is our graduating ceremony for the 2022-2023 group. The leadership, myself, I'm Len Kleinreich. I'm director of this IRI group, the Internet Research Initiative. Rohit over here is a program coordinator who spent more time with you operating students, and for the new students, welcome, those of you here. And then there's Venki Haranarayan, and he's very important because he's the person who puts up the funds that's allowing us to run for 7 years now. A wonderful person. He's a former student of mine. Got his PhD finally up in Stanford. He's a mentor, as many of us are. He's the founder of this effort. He's the funder. He's a colleague, and he's a friend. And he very much enjoys the theme of this event, of this program, which is that it's interdisciplinary. The important part is it's not drawn out of engineering or computer science. It's drawn across the campus, as you well know, those of you in here. And that brings a rather interesting flavor to what we talk about. It's not just pure technology. It's anything to do with the internet, which involves everything. You know, ethics, misinformation, structure, diversity, et cetera, as well as technology development. And he appreciates that because he himself is an engineer. He's also a venture capitalist, and a very successful one. And he's founded some companies. So he looks at things across a broad spectrum in terms of talents, skills, viewpoints, understanding, et cetera. So Venki, thank you. Ordinarily, we would have him speak through a video, but we've given his speech a few times now, and some of you have heard it. But he's very, very basically involved and pleased about what we're doing here. So the program, as we know, is run by a bunch of mentors in the sense that they provide assistance to the extent they can to each of the prize winners. These are the mentors we've had in the past, and that group happens to be the mentors of the group that's graduating now. And for the incoming group, we're using some of those, and we have 5 new mentors coming in, drawn from our faculty and outside, all very capable people. And some of the newcomers there. So Maxwell, I don't know which one of these. Nachenberg, yes. You are lucky. He just won a prize for being the best teacher across campus. And he, I wanted to get him involved with some other projects during the year, and he said he just couldn't because he was preparing for the course that he just finished teaching. He put an enormous amount he's a wonderful teacher, enthusiastic, and fun. So, and all of these people are very, very qualified. So let me now talk about next year's prize winners before we talk about the graduating class. We have Maisa, Dylan, Radhika, Ashkat, Aditya, Laura, Maxwell. And I misspelled your name, Jaya. I've got the N at the end of your name. I don't know how that happened. I apologize. And Priscilla. And basically, their topics and mentors are the following. And I've abbreviated long titles, so I may or may not have captured the essence. Oil drilling in LA. Digital maps. Artificial intelligence conflict resolution. Moneyless economy. Something basically called a favor X, where the tokens are generated by favors you do for people. You bring them coffee, you get 3 tokens. You use those tokens to buy maybe some help in some homework problem. Anyway, it's an interesting thought, and he's actually an entrepreneur. He's almost started a company doing this already. Machine learning, genetic algorithms, responsible AI, zero collateral loans, and more. Gradient descent, trying to basically use a networking, a graph theory to access information. And finally, harmony in healthcare. Now, this doesn't sound like a set of engineering topics, and it shouldn't be. And of course, diversity, not only across departments, but across ethnic groups, backgrounds. And as you all know, but I'll explain to some of the people who have not been here before, the way we select a prize winner is we send out a request for applications where they describe something, some project about which you're passionate and what you'd like to do with it. And so you send in an application, and we send that out to the mentors, the set of applications, send out to the mentors. They don't see your name, they don't know your department, or your gender, or your grade point average. They just see what it is you want to do and how you're going to do it. And the mentor will say, I like that one, and that's a prize winner. So it's a very democratic, perhaps too democratic in a sense. It doesn't look at the typical metrics, but all about the project and the research. And it's worked very well. So, the graduating class this year is our 7th year graduation. You guys are in the 8th year coming up. So congratulations. You've enjoyed the pain and the pleasure of individual research. Not only is it a project you want to work on, but you learn what it means to work on your own project. And it is both pain and pleasure. It's been 3 quarters of deep research. You've all bumped into problems. If you didn't, you weren't doing good research. You met barriers, you had successes, you had breakthroughs, you had to decide how to organize things, you had access to data, process, deep knowledge, you learn things. You learn you have to change the problem as you go along, modify it. And most of you have run out of time. And we warned you ahead of time. I'm warning you guys now, you're going to run out of time. Because what happens typically is in the first quarter, you say, oh, I'll study the literature and think more about what other people have done. In the second quarter, well, I'll start thinking about what I'm going to do. The third quarter, I'll do it. I'll get the data. I'll do the experiments. I'll evaluate them. I'll pivot. I'll write it up and get ready. It's too late. And so things get squashed at the end. And this is not atypical, but it's part of the lesson that we want to instill upon you. You guys are warned now. You're going to run into the same problem, I guarantee it. But be aware it's not unusual, but it's something to watch out for. Mostly, though, you get to do the project you want. As I pointed out, the unique thing about this whole program is that you don't get a professor telling you what to do the research on. You're passionate about something. It's your project. You do it. We'll help you figure out how to do it, but mostly you're going to work that out yourself. And you're undergraduates. It's the most unusual ability to allow a student to be able to do that. Typically in college, you're told what to do. Here, do this research, study this. You don't like it, I'll fix it for you. You're on your own. You have a mentor, you have a professor you can talk to, but mostly you're going on your own. And of course, we have Rohit here, who is watching you every month for a report and once a quarter for a presentation to help direct you. And typically what happens is we find the problems I mentioned before. That you're spending too much time on this, you didn't look at this, you ran into this problem, you may want to pivot, you run out of time, etc. But probably Rohit is the one who spends more time with you than your mentor or any professor you bump into. So, graduating class, Henry Chang, Nicola, Hannah, Minnie, Jessica, Mia, Joshua, and Sarah. The topics, just to remind you all, basically Henry was working on a Bluetooth device for connecting together different kinds of handheld devices using Bluetooth quite a bit. Nicola, you're going to see a video of his. He talks about low-cost physical therapy sensors to help you do your daily exercises properly and correct you when you're wrong. Hannah worked on, I've synthesized this, queer adolescents and issues about the world of LGBTQ and how they're treated and mistreated and what's going on in that world. Minnie talks about refugee child education. I probably don't have that correct. Jessica predicting basically groups that are basically disadvantaged, Native American, etc., Philippine. Mia, hyperconsumption, why we buy things, why we're told to buy things more than we need on the internet. Joshua and social media, self-ID, is the way in which the material is presented to you and who's presenting it to you affect how you interpret what you're reading. And Sarah, of course, a better brand strategy, basically taking us across the world, coming up with grand plans, and bringing together lots of outside influence as well. So, each of you in your presentation, and Rohit's going to describe which presentations we have today, we'll open with a 4-quadrant template, as you know. The first quadrant is to just give the title and the topic. Second quadrant, what were the ideas, the new ideas that you presented? What did you want to do? The third one is, what did you do? And last is, what did you find? Now, not everybody's going to hit this exactly the way I described it, but that's the idea, on one chart to be able to say the whole story, and then you expand. So, as I like to say, let the games begin. Rohit, bring up the gang.
All right, hello. Didn't have anything prepared, but thank you, Professor Kleinrock. So just before we start, Mia had a small accident on the way over here, so she's getting that checked before she has a final. So she won't be here today, but I will be uploading her recording from our practice presentation onto the website, so you guys will have access to that. So you guys have had a great year. It's been fun to watch everyone work through the problems, and as a first-year PhD student coming into UCLA, yeah, I've learned a lot from you guys too. So I'm not gonna wax on, but I'm gonna let you guys get started. Minnie, do you wanna come on up? Okay, so did you share this? Yes. All right. And you just have to press.
Great. Thanks for coming out, guys. I'm going to try and keep this rather succinct because I think we're on a bit of a time crunch. So my project title was Closing Technological and Cultural Gaps, Providing Accessible Education for Refugee Children. And my idea was that I could use existing applications which were popular amongst refugee camps like WhatsApp to deliver educational models through the use of like chatbot. So I'm sure you guys have all been spammed by those relentless SMSs that tell you to press 1 for yes and press 2 for no and all that. And my idea was to take that and apply curriculum to it. So like I said, ideas leverage popular existing apps in refugee spaces for education. Number 2, make education cheaper and more accessible, because one of the big problems that refugee children encounter is that they're prevented from actually taking formal education or, given certifications and the like, because host states think that that gives them the right to integrate, and host states usually do not want to take in refugee children, unfortunately. And this was applied to a specific population of the Rohingya, who are currently dispersed from Myanmar. They're expelled from Myanmar. They're an ethnic minority, and most of them live in Bangladesh right now. And I used to live in Bangladesh, and I worked for a very long time with an NGO located in Bangladesh that worked with children. So that's how this idea came about. And the third part was providing more culturally relevant ways of learning. So like I said, a lot of times children don't have access to things which make sense to them. It's just Western education, or it's a very top-down approach where NGOs will just impose universal models of education to target populations. So for my process, the first thing I did was collect survey responses from children and teachers on existing curriculum. I got pretty lucky with this. I was able to complete it pretty early on in fall and winter quarter, and that was really helpful for informing how I wanted to proceed with the project. Afterwards, I processed the data and findings, obviously, and I tried to apply that into the model for WhatsApp, and that's when I realized that I have no technical skills whatsoever, and it was very challenging to, literally learn how to code from scratch. I tried a little bit, a lot of hours were spent just taking crash courses on this and that, and also learning about the WhatsApp API. But in the end, what happened for this year was that I just collected insights on digital learning initiatives for refugee children by speaking to people in the space. And then my next steps, I want to continue trying to make a working model. I recently had an epiphany. I don't know why it didn't hit me the entire year, but with the rise of things like ChatGPT, it's a lot easier to ask it to give you code, and I realized that I could ask it to give me very simple things I could plug into other apps. So there's an app called Telegram, which I found was a lot easier to work with than WhatsApp. So I will continue trying to work on this project because it was something I started prior to IRI, and I mean, there's no reason to imagine I would just abandon it. It's something I'm passionate about, and yeah. So for the data write-up, this is an overview. Like I said, I collected data via Google Forms. I had some input on the Google Forms questions, but not all. But generally, they're around themes of obviously education, accessibility, and also relevance of like what the children were learning. And the Google Forms were filled out by 20 Rohingya girls undergoing Books and Bound curriculum. So Books and Bound is the NGO that I worked with. Specifically, we used For the Girls, which I had some involvement in creating. It was curriculum literally aimed at Rohingya girls, in case you couldn't tell by the title. And from that, I parsed existing data from the girls and also from the teachers who were the ones responsible for disseminating the curriculum, and I assigned them to common identifiable themes and categories, and then afterwards created a report. So the product was a data write-up of survey responses from the girls undergoing their curriculum. Just screenshots, very brief. And some of the key findings I found, number one, like I was right. I mean, I'm pretty sure like we could tell already from past work, but highly contextualized educational materials are really valued by refugee communities, and I found that those impacts are more far-reaching than from within the children themselves, because children are able to take that knowledge and learning and empower themselves to pursue maybe opportunities they wouldn't think would be available to them without that education. For example, for girls, one of the big things is like being told that they can grow up and have a career. It's not necessarily, common in some settings, yeah. Number two is accessibility. It is a major concern for refugees. They do recognize, I guess, like the technical constraints they face living in camps. Number three, blended learning contexts, so integrated into local community social structures, are really effective because they help refugees integrate into society. And what do I mean by local community social structures? I just mean I guess initiatives which involve local leaders and bring those people up to the forefront and bring those people to give you feedback, because that's how effective models are built, because those people are the ones leading and guiding communities, so their word is very important. And number four is a blend of face-to-face contact and digital education models is preferable, even though digital education is arguably cheaper and more cost-effective, assuming people have access to things like mobile phones already. It is very alien, I realize, to just like give someone a phone and be like, okay, you're gonna learn everything about the English language from this phone, and you'll never like speak to another person, especially if you don't come, if you're not technically literate. So conclusion from data write-up, findings do support academic research, because I did have a brief literature review after fall quarter, kind of what Dr. Kleinrock talked about, like you look around, you poke around, you find things. And I also found that surveys displayed that Rohingya girls are really highly motivated to contribute to their own communities. And peer-to-peer learning initiatives might be a highly effective way of promoting community-led development. Okay, so moving on to community insights. So during this portion, I went around basically and tried to talk to as many people as I could in the Rohingya space and also refugee space who are involved in edtech and education. And interestingly, a lot of these people were running social enterprises or basically for-profit companies, which I was taken aback by. But yeah, basically the feedback from parties interested in similar goals to mine was that they also had immense difficulty with technological challenges of WhatsApp, and also with accessing target populations without a full team of coders, translators, and facilitators. I think the most relevant NGO I talked with was one that was working in West Africa, and they actually tried to roll out a math, like a very basic math model on WhatsApp, and they worked on this project for 2 years, and by the end, the most they could get it to do was to answer very basic, like linear questions. So for example, like if you said like 2 times 5 is 10 into WhatsApp, it could tell you if it was right or wrong, but I couldn't actually teach you like why you're wrong. It was just like linear branching. Again, code novice, but like I understood that with, I guess, more unconventional curriculums, the problems it poses is that there are more pathways to branch off of, and that means you need to code each separate pathway, or at least teach the chatbot to recognize those pathways. So overall, main challenges: realize how ambitious my project was, especially in terms of technological needs. Number two, access to my initial target population became even more scarce owing to changes within the camp. Like even over the span of the year, access to Rohingya camp and also like speaking to teachers and children, it's been clamped down even more, unfortunately. And also because I stopped working with Books and Bound after 3.5 years. I also found that work on similar projects to mine in the Rohingya community had already begun, but through different platforms. So a lot of them used native apps and websites instead of WhatsApp, and obviously that comes with a whole host of challenges because it means you need to popularize that app, you need to teach people how to use it, etc. It's not as intuitive. Okay, final deliverable, write-up on best practices in implementing educational materials for communities. It doesn't need to be limited to refugee children. So in the write-up, I'll incorporate insights and notes from different parties, also the data I collected from fall and winter quarter, and identify what makes different platforms, like tech platforms, desirable and undesirable. So conclusions, interviews have proven that digital learning initiatives do offer a lot of value to communities, but teaching people to use them and promoting them is a whole different task. Number two, DLIs are extremely time-consuming and resource-intensive to design. And number three, WhatsApp does not have an easy API to work with. You actually have to pay to even like start poking around. It's called WhatsApp Business. So now every time I WhatsApp my family, they ask me why I have a business account. And starting with easier applications, like a messaging app called Telegram is better for proof of concept. And like I said, I don't know why it didn't occur to me the entire year, but now I know I can ask ChatGPT to like do very simple things for me, and hopefully from there, I will also find other people who can help me. So moving on to thoughts and next steps. Overall thoughts, I think I definitely encountered many of the challenges that I anticipated, but I was still surprised by how I guess difficult it is to learn something from scratch, but I feel I have a much better understanding of the edtech space. Next steps, like I said, number one and like first priority is trying to find people with coding expertise who would be willing to help me. I realized why now in Silicon Valley there's that, I guess, that stereotype or cliche that every engineer is being asked to do something like at all times. Number two is working on proof of concept using more simple curriculum because of, like I said, the challenges in delivering more complicated things over chatbot. Number three, my postgrad plans are slightly up in the air, but I would be interested in volunteering with existing organizations which run DLIs in Singapore, especially with migrant workers, to see exactly how things are executed at the moment, because that population is more accessible to me. So yeah, thank you. And feel free to ask questions.
Yeah, we'll be doing questions after, so we're gonna just crunch through the presentation so that we can have a good discussion at the end. And I know some people have to leave early as well. There's still finals and graduations for other people to get to. Joshua, I know you'd wanted to go next, and I will let you go next.
Hello everyone, my name is Joshua Merdad, and my project is on social media identification and perception. So let's first go over this because it's kind of a complicated, kind of weird, very, let's say, expansive topic. So let's just start with the topic. How do social media platforms play into stereotypes and assumptions about their user base's identities and political affiliations? So to simplify this, if you view a comment on Twitter, well, you have the same perception of it if you viewed it on Reddit. These communities often have very ingrained ways of treating themselves and how they treat others and how they're perceived by others. Like Redditors are often given this perception that they are chronically online, for a lack of a better term, and Twitter users usually have this perception that they're politically extreme. So I was wondering if you used or saw that a comment was from a specific website, you'd attach those stereotypes to that comment simply because you thought it was from that website. So my basic example was, does a liberal white man perceive that every comment they read is from a liberal white man? That's for just perception for demographic information. And the other one is, does a common user just view every comment from Reddit as in chronically online, let's say neckbeard? But that's a little bit mean. We're gonna go on to the next part. So for my process, I created a survey experiment and worked with the IRB to answer these kind of questions, which basically meant I created a Qualtrics survey, and asked people to analyze 3 main questions. I'll go over the questions in the second part. And I analyzed this data for results, and I found these really interesting threads to work on in the future, but I don't know if they're concrete enough to make any establishing thoughts. So because of that, I'm going to expand this project towards like actually finding these answers and guaranteeing that, well, we can't guarantee anything with data, but like making them sound more concrete. And I'm going to share that data at presentations or expositions, and potentially work on focus groups and ask them why they have these assumptions. We're on a time crunch, so I'm going to just move past this one a little bit faster, and this one. Anyways, other questions I want to ask: do these perceptions affect our real-life interactions? And are these perceptions harmful to online discussion? What this basically means, do you have negative associations with a user just because they're from Twitter? Just because you don't like Twitter users? And if someone tells you they use Twitter every day, are you going to view them differently in real life? I could not answer these questions for this project, but I do want to answer them later using focus groups kind of stuff. So here's how I ended up doing it. So first, I created a survey experiment where a participant would be given one of 3 versions of the survey, and then they would be asked their perceptions on this comment. So the first version had the original comment. The second version had it manipulated to look like it's from a generic website. I used a bodybuilding website and removed any identification that's from a bodybuilding website. And the third version made it look like it was from a different website, such as Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, and TikTok. TikTok was removed from the pilot, but we'll get into that later. And this is confusing, so I'm going to walk you through one of the examples here. So this is one of the comments I found on YouTube, and I'd like to ask you guys some questions. I'm going to ask someone this. So I love these videos. I wish all men would watch these. I don't care if it's considered brainwashing. This is what men need to see. This is a real comment. All of these are real. All of these I found on the internet. And I'd like to ask you guys, what age range would you, Hannah, what age do you think this person falls in between? Do you think they're below 18, 18 to 24, 24 to 30? You know the categories. What do you guess? Yeah, that's a good guess. Okay. Okay. All right. Sarah, what gender do you think they are? Male? Okay, that's a good guess. And mom, what a political affiliation do you think they are? Do you think they're a conservative, or do you think they're a liberal? Okay. See, these are all good guesses. So let's, by the way, I hid all of the people's identities whenever I put them on the website, not just because I care about their identity, but because I also didn't want you to be primed by their profile pictures and stuff. But, for you guys, you get to see. So this was I think Hannah was right. It looks like a 25 to 35-year-old, named himself Jenga Jebo. And this was actually liked by the creator of the video, so I wanted to hide that because it's a little bit scary just to find out that 700 people like this. And, I don't know their political affiliation. This is YouTube. Yeah? No, surprisingly not. It was a little dark age music edit. I know. Anyways, let's go to the next one. Oh, well, this is the version where it's from a bodybuilding survey. I might have accidentally deleted the second thing, but I don't think we had enough time for it anyways. So now let's go into the analysis of my pilot survey, because unfortunately, I was not able to do a full survey because IRB and I did not have a great relationship, but I was still able to get out a pilot and find some really interesting lines of just really interesting information. So for the first one, which is the age question, I use analysis via R and Excel, and actually ChatGPT, I did end up using it for the coding, and it was pretty helpful because I don't know anything about coding. And overall, it's a little bit disappointing, but the average was straight in the middle, right? 25 to 34, people guessed it was in between that. But the range, the fact that we have such a fine range between the different websites and Facebook just being way older in comparison bodes well for the fact that people think people on Facebook are old and people on Reddit are young. But honestly, I can't base anything on these total results yet because this was a sample size of 35. But next time, whenever I get this done, I'll hopefully we get some better results. And this one is what I'd base like an entirely new survey or project on, which is the results I got for gender, because they were scary. So as you can see, the total average for gender, which by the way, 1 is for male, 2 is for female, that's how point system worked, was 1.25. That meant 75% of every answer said that the comment they were reading, they assumed it was from a man. That might just be because, I chose questions that were biased towards men, but some of them were just very generic comments, just like, hey, bro, what's up? Like, while they didn't use female-coded language specifically, some of them did to see if that would change the effect, and sometimes it did, but it was just surprising how extensive this effect was on all these questions. 1.26 for Reddit and 1.7 for TikTok. That meant only 17% of responses for those two websites thought that the writer was female. That really surprised me. So I think it would be really interesting to see how affected this question is and see what we can learn about this in the future. And this one, I feel like was my weakest one, and I think I need to do further analysis into. But basically for political affiliation, we had a really fine spread, and I think if I had a better ability to code or read information, I'd see how much of this was built off of just averages and based off each question, but that's for the future, and I'll figure that out later. So, okay, now we're going to the answers. What have I learned? What did we see from this? So, do our perceptions change based off of website data? Yes. Results still hazy. Does participants' demographic information change their perception of the comments? Yes. I actually did ask everyone's gender, political affiliation, and their age before each question, and I did cross-check it for several answers, but it wasn't as extensive as I thought, and I definitely need to do a little bit more research on it. And do we have a general perception of those on the internet? Yes, there is definitely a general perception of a commenter being a male 18 to 25-year-old, which kind of was what I was expecting, but I was just not expecting it to be that concrete of an answer for some of these. And let's go into challenges. Yeah, IRB. Turns out for everyone doing future projects, I think we'll bring it up later, check how confusing doing the IRB is going to be for your specific project. It is not going to be fun if you don't check this on day one. Me and Kleinrock had a conversation with it on day one. I thought I was fine. I was not fine. But at the end of the day, I was able to change my survey method to a pilot, so I was able to find more specific details, and I still was able to do my project overall, so I'm pretty happy about it. And in the future, I'm going to learn the process beforehand, and you guys should too. And I'm going to discuss alternative routes earlier. I was too hell-bent on trying to do IRB for like a good 2 months. I'm just trying to fix that. That was not the route. I should have went alternatively. I could have gone and done IRB with like outside of UCLA even, if that was a better choice. And something I really had some interesting questions about was, how do people perceive questions like comments written by AI? Because do they have just assumptions based off of AI? Those are generic. Those are written off of humongous amounts of information. I just thought it would be really cool to learn about. And obviously, I want to obtain a larger sample. And finally, here's what I want to get out of this. Like, what does this mean for our general perceptions? Basically, there's a humongous gendered impact. A lot of content is assumed to be made by men on the internet. And it creates this power struggle between men and women on the internet, where men are given all this power of assumption, where they're just assumed to be the the original, the normal, while women are seen as a rarity or other on these websites. And I feel like that takes away a lot of power, and there's something that we should move towards making that feel more equivalent and equal. Obviously, I am one person. That is not going to be just me. But I'd like to see how I can make that feel more equivalent in the future. And I think, yeah, for just future plans, expand this towards gender questions, work with focus groups, discuss this at presentations, and that should be it. Yeah, we'll ask questions afterwards. Thank you so much.
Sila. And enjoy your graduation. Something happened. There we go.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Sela, and my mentor was Jeff Burke, and my project was OZA, which is community-powered streaming. So this is my quad chart. So pretty much all of last year, I had worked at an entertainment marketing agency, so it got me really interested in content discovery and distribution, and more specifically, the role that I think community plays in content discovery and distribution, as well as at the same time started getting interested in emerging tech, things like DAOs, blockchain, AI. And so with that, I was really curious as to what emerging tech could bring to the entertainment discovery and distribution space. So from that, I decided to dive into what were the main problems being faced in streaming and entertainment distribution, did some research there, and then from that was able to see, okay, what's a solution we can create with emerging technology, blockchain, which ended up being my project, which is OZA. And basically most of the year I was working on the research side as well as developing a prototype. And I will go deeper into all of this. But this was kind of my research initially into the trends in consumer sentiment and behavior in movie and TV streaming. And pretty much everything I found fell under one of two buckets. So the first was I found a general frustration with content fragmentation. So mainly, this kind of means that if you're interested in some type of entertainment, whether it be like anime, rom-coms, dating shows, you have to be subscribed to at least like 2 different streaming platforms to access that content. So someone's like, oh, I'm into anime, I have to see all of the different things that all the other anime people or people who are into anime are watching. I have to be on Netflix, Hulu, Paramount Plus, Crunchyroll, Paramount, like, etc. There's so many. And then as well as a frustration with algorithmic recommendations. So we found that in a study done by, I think it was PwC, that 58% of streamers are dissatisfied with the algorithmic-based recommendations, and they feel like they don't align with their preferences. And 41% feel that recommendations lack genre, language, or cultural diversity. And so then amidst all this, people being frustrated, they don't know what to watch. We're seeing an increased reliance on external platforms for recommendations. So people are going to Reddit, going to Twitter, asking friends and family, okay, what do I watch? Instead of just going on Netflix and trusting those recommendations that are coming right to you. So my question from this was, how can we leverage social networks to enhance recommendations in the overall streaming experience? And in this, how can we actually incentivize users and fairly reward them for the value that they bring by providing their recommendations? And so that is what resulted in OZA, which is basically a platform where any community can design their own streaming hub to discover, enjoy content, and earn rewards together. And in short, I would say, so instead of going to asking friends or going to Twitter or Reddit to find out what to watch, the platform already is just made up of the content that those people are watching. So easier way to say it is if you think of any community that you're in, UCLA student, engineering student, if you are a Yogi fan of Adam Sandler, you can immediately go into these hubs and see what other people in those communities are watching and recommending. So this is, I'm going to go through this really quickly, but a little demo so you get a better idea. See. There we go. So this kind of shows you an idea of like all the different hubs, and there's a lot of diversity between them. So we want to open up a lot of opportunity to really make like a Netflix that feels native to whatever the community. So if you're an anime, you can customize a theme. Here's another one. So you get the idea that they all really feel very custom and kind of like your own home. And then one more. So you basically plug into anything that aligns with your interests. And so I'm going to go into this one. And so one of the main things for the recommendation system is you can go in, you can immediately see what are the top titles being streamed by people in those communities that they're actually watching. So this one's kind of an example of like people who are into like 2000s rom-com. So you can see, okay, these are the actually things that they're watching and recommending. And then similar to Spotify, users can actually make playlists of movies. So this kind of replace what you're seeing as you're like scrolling through Netflix. And this is really meant to be obviously kind of like a curation, creative opportunity, and to really get into like the more nuanced tastes that algorithms can't really replicate in terms of recommendations. So this is sort of how you're being able to help the algorithm and recommendations. And then while you can watch shows by yourself, you can also plan watch parties, so users can watch together. And then there's a lot of customization available there too. So obviously there's like some movies that you want everyone to be talking during. I would think like when you're watching The Bachelor or something, it's not really to watch it, but it's more for the community experience. So you want to be able to hear everyone, whereas like other movies, it's like you want to know people are there, but like you don't want anyone to say anything and you don't want to see anyone. So that is that. And then also there's like a linear TV component. So kind of like with Spotify, watch or listening parties, you can add to like a queue of something that's always going. So if you're like, okay, I want to jump in, same ways like when you're turning on your TV, there's something that the community is kind of collaborating on this linear channel. And so that's all I'm going to go through from here. Then this is kind of when people ask like, okay, where does the blockchain come in? And so I'm not going to get too into the nitty gritty, but what blockchain allows is for us to more easily identify the value that users are bringing to the platform through like creating playlists, through attending watch parties, through even talking and just like recommending shows. So we can track that and then actually be able to automatically reward it. So if you say maybe there's like an anime hub and they're playing a huge role in basically driving attention to this one title, they'll get a greater, and also just like, I guess, traffic to the platform, we're able to more easily distribute revenue in proportion to the value they're bringing across these hubs. And this gets a lot more like, I guess, detailed later on too, because then for individual users, you're also able to like offset subscription fees. So say I'm a person and I'm making a lot of playlists for all these communities, we're able to see that, and your subscription fee could be lowered proportionally to that. So that's kind of that component. But in short, I think I kind of view this as now by doing things that communities are naturally enjoying. So maybe I'm in like the Greenpeace hub, which is about like cares about climate change. We're watching those kind of movies together, having those discussions, making those recommendations. Now we're able to capture a percentage of the revenue that we can choose to donate towards organizations or like anything, trips we want to go on. And then there's also a component where studios can establish their own kind of hub within the platform. And this is kind of important because when you go on Netflix right now, and if you watch a really good movie that maybe isn't created by Netflix, you'll automatically be like, oh, well, I saw that on Netflix, instead of tying it back to the studio. So studios don't really have representation in different streaming platforms. So this gives them kind of an opportunity to do that, promote their content, as well as be like, oh, maybe I'm Sony and I see that Moms Who Hike from Los Angeles are like really big fans of our content, and that's weird. So I can also reward them and have that direct to community distribution component, because it's really hard now with like if I'm a studio and I'm putting something out and I'm like, okay, do I put it in this theater? Do I release this title to Netflix or release it to Hulu? Because there's so many different tastes across all of them instead of being really defined as you want to target niche communities. So these are sort of the benefits on both sides. So I tried to kind of find something that equally can meet the needs being faced on the studio side and distributor side, as well as consumers. So obviously enhance content discovery, eliminating endless scrolling on platforms, more rewards opportunities just by naturally doing things you're already doing, talking about movies, recommending, obviously membership in a community, as well as kind of creative expression I see through like curation. And then for studios, more cost efficiency in distribution because they're able to distribute directly to communities and also incentivize them for helping to play a role in distribution and evangelizing films, as well as enhance audience insights and niche targeting, and then a way to build more brand awareness and loyalty, as well as a lot of other kind of expanded monetization open opportunities, which are enabled a lot by kind of the token creation. And so for overall with this project, major milestones, I spent a lot of time on the like UX research and design. Most of the prototype was done by me, as well as I worked with a designer. I got a chance earlier this year to pitch to Sony Business Incubator Innovation Fund, and they were really interested and they wanted more developed on the back end because Sony, or I guess they're out of Japan, so Japan does a really good job, I would say, if anyone kind of knows, like they're not the best at software, but they really like scaling software, but they love to have like something more built out on the back end to play around with. So that's what I've been working on since then, while also I spent a lot of time exploring kind of various like design and distribution protocols, specifically for like the tokenization component and seeing what parts of that we could possibly patent. And then continuing, I'm going to be doing some more beta development with a product studio, which is Builder AI, exploring other partnerships, expanding the team, and obviously I've kind of become more aware of other issues in streaming, like the fact that I think compared to linear TV, it almost has twice as many carbon emissions, so I'm trying to figure out other ways you could offset that, as well as like other issues coming up in the way that value is rewarded in entertainment as a whole. And overall, I think takeaways from this, first, I think building obviously anything is really tough, but especially I think in blockchain and Web3, it's pretty interesting first just because of the volatile sentiment. So one day, like kind of the same thing you're seeing with AI right now, like you drop the word Web3 blockchain and it's a big like buzzword, it's super exciting. The next day it's like huge red flag. And it usually depends on like other players in the ecosystem, for example, like FTX. And so it's like everyone gets really excited. So I think with that, it's kind of taking time to learn and observe a space and don't get caught up too much in the hype. And I would say this a lot in like, especially if you're building maybe an AI right now, it's like, I feel like it can be really tempting to go like full into something really, really fast just to get it out there. But I think kind of observing the ebbs and flows of the space, not being like, oh, there's a lot of funding in this area, I'm gonna try to do that really quickly, because as I've seen like a lot in crypto, like 90% of the stuff has already like kind of burned and bust, and there are like valuable things there, but I think that's the people who are building slowly and watching. And I spent over a year really like trying to learn about the space and get a good handle on like, I guess kind of the middle ground between where the general like market was and where the current one. And I think that's really important too, because as you go down a rabbit hole, I think it's pretty easy to be like, oh, we're gonna do all these things all at once, and then you kind of forget where the actual market is. And so I kind of showed you the vision of like what this platform is, but I think all of those components won't necessarily be in the MVP, but it'll be like back of mind. And so kind of building with the market as they start to get used to the technology. And then obviously I think staying open in your research is really important, especially I think in IRI, like you might feel like you have a really set plan for your research, but I think answers and inspiration can come from anywhere beyond just like your mentors. And then, yeah, last, just have a North Star and know why you're doing something. That was really important, I think, especially in IRI, like have a why. And for me, a lot of this was just bringing more connection and creativity into our daily lives. And the first is through entertainment. But that is for me. Thank you so much.
Very interesting discussions around value with those projects. The next one will be Nick. He is unable to make it today, but we will be watching a recording. And I think, yeah, I have it pulled up here. All right. Do we have sound? Nick couldn't make it because he had back-to-back finals right now. So good luck, Nick. Here it is. All right. Next is Jessica, and there it is.
Hi, my name is Jessica, and today I will be presenting on my project focused on evaluating the Social Vulnerability Index and the Healthy Places Index for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander populations in California. I'll be probably using a lot of acronyms because they're really long names, so I'll abbreviate them as SVI, HPI, and NHPI probably going forward. And yeah, my mentor is Ellen, and it's part of the IRI. So kind of just a quick overview in terms of my call chart. I mainly started looking at this project as part of the NHPI COVID-19 Data Policy Lab that I'm a part of. We found that NHPIs are most disadvantaged in terms of COVID case and death rates, but they're underrepresented in common neighborhood equity metrics, specifically the HPI. And so I wanted to see how representative the SVI is of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander populations compared to the HPI, and then have that as a kind of a measure of improving calculations in the future to better represent minority groups such as NHPIs in overall other disasters that might come up. In terms of my overall process, I looked at the most vulnerable census tracts in each county by index score, and I used that because each county kind of looks at the most vulnerable counties or census tracts, and that's how they allocate different government resources and funding, such as vaccines and things like that. And I compared each racial or ethnic group in these aggregated tracts with their percent in the county overall to determine if they were over or underrepresented. And overall, my conclusions were that the SVI and HPI don't really accurately represent NHPIs in California. Hispanic or Latino populations are the most overrepresented, and within NHPI subgroups, Native Hawaiians are more underrepresented, and Samoans are less underrepresented. So kind of just going back into my main motivation, it is because of COVID-19 racial or ethnic disparities, where Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders experience the highest case and death rates. If you look at this graph, you can see kind of alarming. NHPIs have a much higher death rate compared to any other major racial or ethnic group. But in terms of COVID-19 resource allocation, we found that the index currently used, which is the Healthy Places Index, or the HPI, was underrepresenting NHPI populations. And this is the version 2.0 that was used during COVID. They actually recently released a new version that kind of updates the index score. So that's the HPI. I also wanted to look at a really commonly used metric as well called the Social Vulnerability Index, developed by the CDC. So far, it's mainly used for disastrous events to allocate FEMA resources. And it's used more federally, but not in California. And this is due to an interesting proposition in California that prohibits the use of race or ethnicity explicitly as a factor in allocating government funding. So I kind of wanted to see if that would actually make a difference between the SVI and the HPI. Because if you see in this main table here, the HPI and the SVI have more or less similar indicators that it uses to calculate their overall index score. The biggest ones are economic, household characteristics, housing, and transportation. But notably, the SVI does include racial and ethnic minority status. So I did want to see, compared to the HPI, if that would better represent NHPI populations. That was my hypothesis. So my overall question was, if the SVI was used instead of the HPI, would the NHPI community be more likely to receive COVID-19 resources where they lived And I was actually able to kind of expand on this question and look at the newly released version of the HPI that I mentioned earlier, the HPI 3.0, and see if that had any improvements relative to the previous version as well. So in terms of my overall process, I obtained data sets from HPI, SPI, and census tracts. Some of them are more publicly downloadable than others. The HPI specifically has does an interesting API key that was pretty cool. So yeah, these are the main data sets I worked with. I imported everything into Excel. There were a lot of extra columns. There's just like so much data, so I was able to condense it from like 700 plus to 41 columns. I imported everything into Jupyter Notebooks or Python script and analyze, combined everything and kind of cleaned everything up. And then in terms of my data analysis, this is kind of a general gist of how it works. I imagine all the diamonds as all the census tracts in California. I took the top 25% most vulnerable census tracts by SPI ranking, and then also later HPI 3.0 ranking. I aggregated them by the county that they were in, so that I found the aggregate of most census tracts in each county. And then I compared that aggregate and looked at the percent of each racial or ethnic group in that aggregate of census tracts with the percent of that group in the overall county. And that's how I determined if they were over or underrepresented in the county. And as a general gist, this is kind of, these are like the overview of my results. If you look at, there's a lot going on in this graph. This is kind of just to like see everything. But if you look here, there's actually not really a huge difference between all three kind of index scores, except for Asian alone. The SPI is actually a little bit more, like it underrepresents more racial ethnic groups than the HPI does. So basically the higher the percentage value basically means there are more percentage of California counties that are underrepresented. And so if you look at NHPI alone specifically, you'll see that the SPI is actually the worst in terms of it underrepresents 49% of California counties versus 43 and 40% in the HPI versions. It's not a huge difference, but it's still kind of interesting compared to what my hypothesis would have been. And then I also looked at how, like, the magnitude of over and underrepresentation in each index. And I found that the NHPI population was approximately 4 times less represented than Hispanic or Latino populations at 10% versus 40%, and then around 3% or 3 times less represented than Black or African American populations. And this was really interesting because this is kind of similar to what I saw in the HPI 3.0 and 2.0 versions as well, except in the 3.0, NHPIs are actually a little bit more underrepresented, and Black or African Americans are a little bit less overrepresented as well. And so this is really interesting given the fact that NHPIs still do have the highest case and death rates from COVID-19. You would expect them to be more overrepresented than other racial or ethnic groups. And similarly, as I said earlier in my quad chart, in terms of subgroups, you can see that Samoans are a lot more overrepresented than Native Hawaiians in the SPI, and similarly, you'll see that in the HPI 3.0. Samoans are more overrepresented than Native Hawaiians. And a lot of this has to do with kind of the historical context behind it, where Native Hawaiians mostly had the economic means to move to California, so they're a little bit more, they don't live as much in vulnerable census tracts versus Samoans. A lot of them served in the army and came here, and so they kind of are more harder hit in terms of COVID-19 case and death rates, you'll see as well. So in terms of my overall conclusions, despite factoring in race or ethnicity as an indicator, the SPI doesn't actually adequately represent NHPI populations in vulnerable census tracts, contrary to what I was thinking or what I hypothesized. And I actually do think that there are a lot of factors that kind of cause this. I think the biggest one is how it factors in race or ethnicity. It does so as an aggregated whole. It kind of calculates the percent of minorities in each population versus looking at like specific minority populations, which has a really big, I think, error in terms of accounting for smaller minority populations. So like NHPI is also American, Indian, Alaskan Native populations. In terms of like overall other conclusions, Hispanic or Latinos are most overrepresented, and then within NHPI subgroups, Samoans are overrepresented, Native Hawaiians are underrepresented, and there is significant variation that exists between counties. And then, so in terms of overall next steps, I did have a kind of wrote up everything into like a more comprehensive research paper. I want to look at analyzing like possible associations between where like different racial or ethnic groups are over or underrepresented and see what the actual like their populations are in that county or census tract to see if there's any correlation there. And I think one thing that would be helpful also moving forward in the future is to look at creating specific equity indexes for different minority groups. For example, it's NHPI specific equity index, just so that it can kind of complement these current indexes and see, find ways to see where it's missing. Because I mean, in terms of these scores, there's never like a perfect solution. It's kind of catering to what population you're looking for. And yeah, I don't know. There were definitely a lot of challenges in terms of calculating things, getting the data, downloading the data. I would, I guess, for the future cohort, definitely say to ask for help, like from whoever you can, not just your mentor. But yeah, that's my project. I thank you to the IRI for a great year.
All right. Henry was not able to be here today because he was hired in New York, and so he's over in New York right now. So, Hannah, if you're ready, we're going to go over to you. I don't see yours. Oh. Okay. 1 second. I'm going to turn this screen mirroring off for just a second. That's fine. There it is. All right. My bad. Sorry. Wow, that's very. There we go. All right. Sorry about that. And we are ready.
Thank you, Rohit. Thank you, everybody. So this is my presentation on LGBTQ plus adolescents and women and girls, because I'm going to be focusing on adolescent social media usage. Oh. Oh. Okay. We'll figure it out. Okay, cool. So this is my quadrant, and my name's Hannah, and my advisor was Dr. Miriam Posner. So my general title for the paper that I wrote as a deliverable is Seeing and Being Seen, LGBTQ plus Adolescents for Women and Social Media. So my ideas that I was curious about, that I was researching, are what are LGBTQ adolescents doing online? How is the internet shaping and being shaped by the critical mass of queer youth today? And how are these questions different for LGBTQ plus adolescent girls and women? My research process is that I began with a scoping review, which is a type of literature review on sources, just everything that I could find about this topic, about specifically LGBTQ adolescent social media use. And then I narrowed that, I'll explain more why, to specifically girls and women. And then once I found essentially the gap in the research, which was there was very little specifically on girls and women, but there's a lot generally on LGBTQ and other communities within the acronym. I decided to seek IRB approval to conduct interviews with a sample of 30 LGBTQ identifying women aged 18 to 21 to speak on their experiences being in these digital communities in their adolescence. And I used something called a snowball interviewing technique, wherein I reached out to just a few people that I know, and then they would refer me to other people to interview, and those people referred me out, so that I wasn't like self-selecting like just my friends, and making sure everything was like geographically diverse and diverse in multiple ways. And so my conclusion and next steps, I concluded, and I'll talk more about this in my results slide, but social media enables seeing and being seen and visibility for a generally or often invisible group. And social media can be an educational, also pro-social tool, which is sort of the antithesis to, I think, a lot of the thinking and talking about social media as an antisocial tool. But I think for this community, I discovered it was pretty pro-social. And I think that in the future, researchers could build on my research, because this is an under-researched topic, and also use it to think more critically about serving this population in schools and things like that, especially given the sort of like anti-LGBTQ stuff going on in Florida and other similar states. So the beginning of my project began with this sort of stuff in the news about how there's like an exponential growth of LGBTQ identifying people in the United States, and particularly among young people. And this is a graph that I made based on data from the National Health and Social Life Survey, Gallup, Pew Research Center, and then this is just from Gallup itself. So there's this increase in LGBTQ population, and then a major increase in social media usage, and particularly social media usage among adolescents. So I want to get at the nexus of all of these things. And then more so the niche. What are the girls in these communities doing in their digital communities, and how are the concerns, issues, questions, findings different from the other groups like queer boys, trans youth, things like that. So essentially in my scoping review, my preliminary research, I found that there was a lot generally on LGBTQ adolescents. If you search that, there's a lot about what that general community is doing on social media. And then there was a lot specifically on men and boys, which I included some different academic article titles here. There was a lot, like much more so, on transgender youth, which I think the fact that there's so many on those probably is also like in a meta-analytical level reflective of like general concerns right now for like trans youth mental health, which is what a lot of the articles focused on. But there were very few on specifically women in social media. So I wanted to ask some questions about that. And just to talk about my research process, basically I did a scoping review, and so I have like a huge Google Doc of like this chart with like the paper name, what it's about, the general findings and things like that, for about over 50 articles on this topic, and was able to like crunch the data and find out like this gap in the research, like there's not a lot about like women and girls online. I found specifically in 2B, there's like just really like 8 articles on like LGBTQ adult women, but nothing on adolescents, whereas there's a lot about LGBTQ adolescents in general, and also trans and male youth. So yeah, as I said before, this sort of indicates societal norms and also contemporary political and health concerns. So now that I've discovered this gap, that there's not specifically a lot about women and girls, I want to try to fill it. So as I said, I did this snowball sampling type of interview style, and I got IRB approval. And I just wanted to get a lot of information that really wasn't out there. Like I asked, which platforms do you use the most? Do you use social media for making friends? Other things, what do you use it for? What's unique about these digital spaces and things like that? And I wanted to get this specific group because I noticed that there were really different findings between the articles that just sort of grouped everyone together under this umbrella that has very different experiences depending on like gender identity and sexual orientation. And the findings in all those general articles were very different versus like the findings and like once you got more specific, like just talking to trans youth or just talking to male youth and things like that. So it was important to talk specifically to women about these things. So these are my findings for my paper that came as a result of these interviews. So I just have some sort of like basic statistical data of the 30 women and, you know, assigned female birth people that I talked to. So pretty much anyone who would have identified or been identified as a woman in adolescence. I also got some information on sort of like where these communities are proliferating, because they are really big, like the queer community. I mean, I think like a lot of different niche adolescent communities right now are very, very online. And so we want to know where they are and what they're doing. So I found Instagram and Reddit are the most popular, but Discord and TikTok. TikTok was a close third, and Discord is very much growing. And people are reading and watching, but they're also posting and talking to like smaller channels and finding like people to talk to about their more niche interests and experiences that they can't like find in like big budget films, or like just in their school environment, or maybe a small rural town, things like that. And they're also looking for in-person opportunities. Like I said, I think that social media, at least for this community, is very much like a pro-social tool, and people are starting off online, but then finding other people in their city or state to meet up with, and they're finding people online, but then like, let's get off the screen, let's like meet up in person and create like queer community in real life. So the first section of my paper, and this was sort of, I basically interviewed all these people and I wanted to organize what I found thematically. So I have these two themes and kind of ideas that emerged from the interview. So the one, I call it seeing and being seen, which is a term kind of like borrowed from nightlife, which I think is important. Like you go out to like see and be seen, because a lot of American queer culture began in the sort of underground nightlife scene, and that's where people went to see and be seen in a way that they couldn't outside of like these underground nightlife spaces. And I'm seeing that the internet today is sort of like the new underground, like it's the new nightlife, it's the new place to find like the people who are like weird in the ways that you're weird, like niche and, you know, kind of minoritarian in the ways that you are. So it's a place to see yourself and see others, like in terms of like relatable humor, discussions, conversation threads on apps like Reddit and Discord, content, media about unique lesbian or like WLW experiences around sex, dating, longing, feeling isolated as like a very like minoritarian group, social and media invisibility. But then in terms of seeing and being seen, there's also a move toward in-person and public spaces. And so there's this element of social media as pro-social. A lot of the women I talked to mentioned using social media to find out about like public gatherings, book clubs, create book clubs, or something like that with like other women in their area or on Zoom. So it wasn't just like people like scrolling and then just like not talking to anyone. There was a lot of friendship, a lot of communication, a lot of community building and things like that through these spaces. And then I also, in that regard, found there was a lot of like information, reading, education. So I'll talk about this, I think it's in the next slide, but social media is where people learn about themselves and how to be, like how to date, how to live, how to be social, how to have like discourse around the sort of politics and identity and just like day-to-day life of this community, especially if like, you know, like no one in your family identifies as queer, you don't have queer friends, like, and you discover this about yourself, like usually in adolescence, like what does this mean for me? Like what am I going to do now? This is where you can go to get that information and to read about it and learn about it. And then people usually go beyond the digital space. So these are some examples of things that people have said to me in interviews. So I'll start with the first one. I asked, how did the internet and social media shape your queer identity as an adolescent or to this day? And this respondent said, before I became active on the internet, I didn't realize there were words to explain how I felt. I had known I liked girls for a while, but I didn't realize I could identify as a lesbian or exclusively date women until I read about it online. I also didn't realize I didn't have to identify as a binary cis woman until I became active online. And then I asked, how has the internet and social media shaped your experience of coming out and or being in the closet as a young person? And this person said, I feel like I can be more open about my identity on the internet. I'm not entirely closeted in real life, but I'm not out to as many people there as I am online. And then this is like another person that I spoke to, which I think kind of evidences like the pro-social argument that I have. I said, how has social media influenced your queer identity? And she said, it made me want to seek it out in the real world. It's something like it being social media, something I've engaged with less. And they talked about in terms of like the information education, it's a very college educated or self-educated space. Like there's people who are really big into Pan-Africanism or queer studies or women's studies. And again, with the pro-social things, I don't want to say this as a general rule for every queer person. It has been my experience, though, that I moved through online spaces when I didn't have an in-person space, especially with queer women of color, and that's where I work now. They work at a queer center 30 hours a week, but I'll still look at silly meme pages. And this person uses like Discord channels still, though, to talk to other women. and things like that. And I wanted to think about these issues of information and gaining information about who you are and seeing and being seen through the works of different queer cultural critics and academic researchers and things like that. The first quote I have is from Judith Butler, who was writing about why there was so much legislation in the 19th and 20th century against like gay male sexual relations, but there wasn't really anything about like queer women being legislated against, which is a good thing. But she wrote that lesbianism is not explicitly prohibited, in part because it has not even made its way into the thinkable, the imaginable, that grid of cultural intelligibility that regulates the real and the nameable. So in terms of seeing and being seen, these social media spaces are a way for like young queer people to be culturally intelligible to one another, and to name one another and be real to one another. And David Halperin has a book called How to Be Gay, which was named after a really controversial class he taught with the same title at the University of Michigan in the early 2000s. But he kind of talks about how you learn how to be gay in like a cultural, social way. And he's writing mostly about gay men here, but I think this could be applied to a lot of queer communities. But he writes that gayness is a specific way of being that gay men must learn from one another in order to become who they are. So I think that this kind of thing is happening more in the digital space now, where you learn how to become who you are, which seems like a paradox, but it is a thing that happens. And then I also pull from the thinkers Nicole Brennan and Sarah Ahmed, their theories on social media as a place which can inspire real life changing community, and it's a way for people to gather and grow. My deliverables, like I said, the scoping literature review, where I found this gap in the research and what has been written about LGBTQ adolescents and social media use. And then my paper, which I give all the analysis of the interviews, findings, and arguments and things like that. So thank you so much to Professor Kleinrack and Rohit and everybody here in IRI. Thank you.
All right, that's everyone. One of the things I liked is just how different everybody's project is, and it really feels like you guys are doing your own thing, which is really what it's about. I guess I'll open up the table now to any questions.